Yeah, I bent the rules. I kept this county clean while everyone else looked away. Now you're shocked because you finally saw it on camera?
God, guide my gavel. Let it strike, not in anger, but in absolute truth. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that only exists when two immovable forces are about to collide. On one side, the weight of the state, represented by a badge that had seen 30 years of service. On the other side, the fragile life of a young man, hanging by a thread that this officer had deliberately cut. It was finally time, the moment everyone had been whispering about for weeks. I looked down from the bench. I didn't look at the files. I didn't look at the lawyers. I looked at him, Sheriff Miller. He stood there, not like a defendant, but like a conqueror surveying his territory. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut glass. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the fluorescent lights of my courtroom. And on his chest, that badge, it gleamed. To most people, that badge is a symbol of safety. To him, it was a shield, a fortress, a license to do whatever he pleased. I watched him scan the room. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. He adjusted his belt, the leather creaking in the silence. He winked at a deputy standing by the door. That wink told me everything I needed to know. He thought this was a formality. He thought he was part of the club. He thought that because we both served the law, I would protect him. You could hear a pin drop. The gallery was packed. Half the room was filled with officers, blue uniforms, creating a wall of solidarity. The other half, the community, the people who whispered his name in fear, the people who knew that if Sheriff Miller pulled you over, you didn't just worry about a ticket, you worried about your freedom. I saw the young victim in the front row, Marcus, 19 years old. He was shaking. His mother held his hand so tight her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at the sheriff. She was looking at the floor, praying. She knew what happens when you fight the police in this town. Usually, you lose. My father used to tell me, Frank, a man who demands respect usually doesn't deserve it. A man who earns respect never has to ask for it. Sheriff Miller didn't just demand respect. He felt entitled to it by divine right. He looked up at me, a slight smirk playing on his lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the lion tamer has forgotten to lock the cage. He leaned over to his attorney and whispered something. They both chuckled, a soft, dry sound that grated against my nerves. I thought to myself, he has no idea. He thinks he's here to answer for a procedural error, a paperwork mistake, as his lawyer called it in the briefing. He thinks I'm going to give him a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence, maybe a quiet retirement with full pension. He doesn't know that I've seen the video. He doesn't know that I've read the forensic report that was buried on page 400 of the evidence file. He thinks he is the law. But in this room, for the next few minutes, I am the reality check. I picked up my gavel. I didn't strike it. I just held it, feeling the weight of the wood, the weight of the decision I was about to make. I cleared my throat. The smirk on Sheriff Miller's face didn't waver. He crossed his arms. All rise, the bailiff called out. Sheriff Miller stood up slowly, dragging his feet, taking his time. A power move, a signal to everyone watching. I move when I want to move. I looked him dead in the eye. The air conditioner hummed. The clock ticked. Sheriff, I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution, to protect the innocent. He nodded, a mock gesture of agreement. I did, Your Honor, and I've kept these streets clean for 3 decades. Clean, I repeated. That's an interesting word choice. I leaned forward, because today we are going to talk about dirt. Specifically, the dirt you planted in a young man's car to destroy his future. The smirk flickered, just for a second, and so it began. Not a trial, an unmasking. The silence that followed was suffocating. Most defendants, when accused of a crime, they flinch. They look at their lawyer. They look at the floor. Sheriff Miller did none of those things. He looked at me with a gaze that could freeze water. Planting evidence, he said, his voice steady, devoid of any emotion. That is a serious accusation, Your Honor. I hope you have more than just the word of a scared kid with a prior record. He played his card early, the prior record card. It's the oldest trick in the book. Dehumanize the victim. Make him look like a criminal so that whatever happens to him feels like justice, even if it's a lie. I didn't blink. Mister, Marcus does have a record, I acknowledged. A misdemeanor for trespassing when he was 16. A mistake. But mistakes do not give you the right to manufacture crimes. Miller scoffed. He actually scoffed. He turned his head slightly to the gallery, as if inviting them to share in the absurdity of my statement. I found a bag of narcotics under the driver's seat. Standard procedure. The search was legal. The arrest was by the book. By your book, I corrected. But let's look at the state's book for a moment. I picked up a file, a thin, nondescript folder. I saw Miller's eyes flick to it. He didn't recognize it. That was the first crack in his armor. He knew every file in his precinct. He controlled the paperwork. If there was a file he didn't know about, it meant there was a leak. I opened it slowly. You filed a report stating that your body camera malfunctioned during the search. Is that correct? Technology fails, Your Honor. Batteries die. It happens. He shrugged, a gesture of practiced indifference. It does, I said, but dash cams, they are harder to kill, especially the new systems your department installed last month, the ones that record even when the lights are off. The smirk vanished completely now. His jaw set. A muscle in his cheek twitched. He knew. In that split second, he knew he had missed something. I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. You thought you were invisible in that dark alley. You thought the shadows were your accomplices. But you forgot that shadows disappear when you shine a light on them. I signaled to the bailiff. Play the video. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Grainy footage appeared. It was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights. You could see Marcus's car. You could see Marcus, handcuffed on the curb, looking terrified. And then you saw the sheriff. He wasn't searching the car. He was leaning into his own patrol vehicle. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small plastic bag. Comment below. What goes through your mind when you see a guardian turn into a predator? On the screen, the sheriff walked over to Marcus's car. He didn't look inside first. He didn't shine a flashlight. He reached through the open window and dropped the bag onto the floorboard. Then he stepped back, pulled out his flashlight, and yelled, "Gotcha." The video froze on that frame. The bag in midair, the lie caught in 4K resolution. I looked back at Miller. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at me. And for the first time in 30 years, the look in his eyes wasn't arrogance. It was hatred. Pure, unadulterated hatred. That video, he snarled, pointing a finger at me, lacks context. Context? I asked, my voice cutting through his anger like a scalpel. Sheriff, the context is that you just framed an innocent boy because you didn't like the way he looked at you. The context is that you are a criminal with a badge. The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. The mother in the front row let out a sob that broke my heart. I banged the gavel. Once. Hard. Order. I turned back to him. You wanted context? Here is your context. That badge on your chest is no longer a shield. It is evidence. The gavel strike didn't silence him. It only made him louder. Miller took a step forward. His hand instinctively went to his belt, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He had surrendered his gun at the door, but the muscle memory of violence was still active. You think a video tells the whole story, he bellowed, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. I know this kid. I know his type. If he didn't have drugs on him that night, he would have had them the next night. I was being proactive. Proactive, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a foul smell. Is that what we call perjury now? Is that what we call framing a citizen? Miller spun around, looking at the gallery, trying to rally support from his fellow officers. I keep this town safe. I do the dirty work so you people can sleep at night. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to break the bad guys. You think the streets stay clean by magic? I watched the officers in the room. A few looked down, staring at their boots, ashamed. But others held Miller's gaze. They nodded slightly. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't just one bad apple. He was the rot that spreads when no one cuts it out. He believed his own lie. He genuinely believed that his badge gave him the moral authority to play God. I leaned into the microphone. Sheriff, let me explain the difference between bending the rules and breaking the law. Bending the rules is letting a mother off with a warning for speeding because she's rushing to the hospital. Breaking the law is planting evidence on a 19-year-old student on his way to a night shift. I picked up Marcus's personal file. That's right, Marcus wasn't prowling, as you wrote in your report. He was driving to a warehouse job, a job he took to pay for community college because his financial aid fell through. You didn't stop a crime, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You stopped a life. You tried to turn a student into a statistic just to boost your monthly arrest numbers. Miller slammed his fist on the defense table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I am the law in this county. I have put away more scum than you have eaten hot dinners. You can't touch me, Frank. I have friends in the state capitol. I have the union. There it was. The threat, the implication that his web of influence was bigger than my courtroom. The belief that he was too big to fail. I smiled. A cold, humorless smile. You might have friends in the Capitol, Sheriff. You might have the union on speed dial. But right now, you are in my house. And in my house, political favors don't buy freedom. In my house, the Constitution outweighs your ego. I turned to the court clerk, ignoring Miller's fuming presence. Enter a finding of not guilty for the defendant, Marcus Williams. The case is dismissed with prejudice. The record will be expunged immediately. Marcus collapsed into his mother's arms. The sound of her relief, a guttural weeping cry, filled the room. It was the sound of a nightmare ending. But I wasn't done with Miller. Not even close. Sheriff Miller, I said, you seem to think this hearing is over because the case against the boy is dropped. You are mistaken. He started to turn away, adjusting his jacket, ready to storm out and spin his narrative to the press waiting outside. I'm done listening to this, he spat. I have a department to run. Bailiff, I ordered, my voice cutting through the noise like a whip. Bar the doors. 2 deputies, men who technically reported to Miller, hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then they moved. They stepped in front of the exit, crossing their arms. Miller Fraza. He looked at the deputies, then back at me, eyes wide. For the first time, the predator realized the cage door had swung shut. You aren't going anywhere, I said. Sit down. We are just getting started. Miller sat down. He didn't slump. He dropped into the chair like a man whose strings had been cut. For 30 years, he had walked into courtrooms as the narrator of other people's lives. He decided who was a criminal. He decided who went home. Now, the pen had been taken out of his hand. Am I under arrest? Miller asked, his voice tight, barely controlling the rage bubbling underneath. Because if I am, I want my union rep. I want the district attorney down here right now. You are not under arrest yet, Mr. Miller, I said, deliberately stripping him of his title. Right now, you are being held in direct criminal contempt of court. His lawyer jumped up. Objection! Your Honor, this is highly irregular. My client made an administrative error regarding the camera footage. You cannot hold a decorated officer in contempt for a technical glitch. A glitch? I asked, looking over my glasses. Counselor, a glitch is when your computer freezes. Planting narcotics in a teenager's car is not a glitch. It is a felony. And lying about it under oath in my courtroom, that is an insult to every flag standing in this building. I turned my attention back to Miller. He was gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. He was doing the math in his head. He was calculating who he could call, what favors he could pull to make this go away. You mentioned your friends in the Capitol earlier. I said, my tone conversational, but deadly serious. You mentioned the union. You think those connections make you untouchable. But here is the problem with corruption, Miller. It's like rot in a floorboard. It holds up fine until you step on it with enough weight. I opened a second file on my bench. This one was thicker. Dusty. Do you recognize this? I asked. Miller squinted. He didn't speak. This is the log of every drug arrest you have made in the last 5 years, where the body camera malfunctioned. 74 cases. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously on their phones. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was an avalanche. 74 people, I continued. 74 lives interrupted. 74 families broken. And in every single one of them, you were the only witness. You were the judge, jury, and executioner on the side of the road. Miller's face went pale. The arrogance was replaced by something else: calculation. He realized I wasn't just looking at one bad night. I was looking at his legacy. You built a career on shortcuts, I said. You realize that planting evidence is faster than investigation. You realize that fear is easier than respect. And you got lazy. You thought no one would check. You thought that because you wore the star, we would all look the other way. I did what was necessary, Miller shouted, unable to help himself. I cleaned up the filth that you judges let walk free. I made the hard calls. You made the illegal calls, I roared back, my voice filling the room, silencing his outburst instantly. You don't get to decide who is filth. You don't get to rewrite the law because you think you know better. That badge represents the trust of the people. When you use it to frame the innocent, you are no better than the criminals you claim to hunt. In fact, you are worse, because they don't hide behind an oath. I stood up. The movement made the entire room flinch. Sheriff Miller, for the crime of perjury committed in open court, and for the willful fabrication of evidence, which I have viewed with my own eyes, I am stripping you of your bond. You can't do that, his lawyer screamed. I just did, I said. Bailiff, take Mr. Miller into custody. And one more thing. I pointed to his chest, to the silver star that had defined his existence for 3 decades. Remove that badge. You don't deserve to wear it in my presence. The sound of a badge being unpinned is quiet, a small, metallic click. But in that courtroom, it sounded like a structural beam snapping in a collapsing building. Miller looked down at his chest. His hands, usually so steady when holding a weapon or writing a citation, were trembling. He fumbled with the clasp. He didn't want to do it. That star wasn't just an accessory to him. It was his identity. Without it, who was he? Just a bully in a costume? He pulled the pin free. He held the badge in his hand for a second, weighing it. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was thinking about throwing it. He was thinking about making a scene. On the table, I commanded. Now, he dropped it. It hit the mahogany defense table with a dull thud. It looked smaller there, just a piece of cheap metal. Without the authority of the state behind it, it was nothing, and neither was he. Deputies, I said, addressing the 2 officers standing by the door, do your duty. This was the moment of truth. These men had reported to Miller that morning. They had laughed at his jokes. They had feared his temper. Now they had to choose, the sheriff or the judge. They didn't look at Miller. They looked at me, and in my eyes, they saw something that terrified them more than an angry boss. They saw the absolute, unyielding force of the law. They walked forward, slowly, respectfully, but firmly. Turn around, sir, one of the deputies said. His voice cracked slightly. Miller stared at him. You've got to be kidding me, Roberts. You're going to cuff me? After everything I've done for you? I got you that promotion. Turn around, Deputy Roberts repeated, louder this time. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratchet tightening on Miller's wrists was the sweetest sound I had heard all day. Click, click. It is a sound Miller had inflicted on thousands of people. He used it to assert dominance. He used it to strip people of their dignity. Now, the metal was biting into his own skin. This is a mistake, Miller hissed as they turned him around. You are starting a war, Frank. The department won't stand for this. The streets will burn without me. The streets will breathe easier without you, I replied calmly. You think you are the dam holding back the flood? No, Sheriff. You are the poison in the water. I looked out at the gallery. The shock had worn off. Now, reality was setting in. People were pulling out their phones, recording the sight of the untouchable Sheriff Miller in chains. This image would go viral before he even reached the booking desk. The myth of his invincibility was dead, but I wasn't interested in the spectacle. I was interested in the cleanup. Mr. Prosecutor, I said, turning to the state's attorney, who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. He had been complicit in this, too, maybe not actively planting evidence, but by looking the other way, by taking Miller's word as gospel because it made his conviction rates look good. Your Honor, the prosecutor squeaked, I am ordering an immediate, independent audit of every single case Sheriff Miller has touched in the last 10 years, I announced. Every drug bust, every resisting arrest charge, every case where the camera failed or the audio cut out. If there is a pattern, we will find it. The prosecutor paled. He knew what that meant. It meant overturned convictions. It meant lawsuits. It meant his office was about to be turned upside down. That will require significant resources, Your Honor, he stammered. Then I suggest you start budgeting, I said. Because justice is expensive, counselor. But ignorance costs more. I looked back at Miller, who was now being led toward the side door, the door that leads to the holding cells, the door for criminals. He stopped at the threshold. He looked back over his shoulder. He wanted one last word, one last threat. You'll regret this, he snarled. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just leaned back in my chair, the symbol of a system that had finally decided to work. The only thing I regret, I said, is that I didn't catch you sooner. The heavy door to the holding cells clicked shut. That sound, the metallic latch engaging, was final. Sheriff Miller was gone. He wasn't the powerful lawman anymore. He was just another inmate waiting for processing. The courtroom remained deadly silent. No one moved. It was as if the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped. The gallery, the clerks, even the remaining deputies seemed stunned by the speed of the collapse. They had walked in expecting a routine hearing. They witnessed an execution of a career. I turned my chair slowly to face the defense table. Marcus was still standing there. He looked shell-shocked. He was staring at the empty spot where Miller had stood, as if afraid the sheriff might materialize out of thin air to drag him away. Mr. Williams, I said softly. Marcus flinched. He looked up at me, eyes wide with lingering fear. This is what corruption does. It instills a reflex of terror that doesn't vanish just because the gavel comes down. You can breathe now, son, I told him. It's over. He took a shaky breath. His mother, standing beside him, gripped his arm. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. The gratitude in her eyes was loud enough. I want to say something to you, Marcus, and I want everyone in this room to hear it, I continued. I cannot give you back the sleepless nights you spent worrying about this trial. I cannot erase the trauma of being handcuffed on the side of the road for a crime you didn't commit. The system failed you that night. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. But the law is not a machine. The law is people. And sometimes people get it wrong. Today, we got it right. You walked into this courtroom a suspect. You leave it a free man. Do not let this man's shadow follow you out that door. You leave his lies here, on the floor, with that badge. Marcus nodded. His shoulders dropped an inch. The tension was leaving his body. Thank you, Your Honor, he whispered. Don't thank me, I said. Thank the truth. It has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep they try to bury it. I shifted my gaze to the back of the room, to the wall of blue uniforms, the other deputies, Miller's men. They were shifting uncomfortably. Some were looking at the floor. Others were looking at me with a mixture of fear and respect. They knew that the dynamic had shifted. The king was dead. To the officers in attendance, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back row, do not mistake what happened here today for an attack on law enforcement. This was a rescue mission. I saw a few heads tilt up. They were listening. Sheriff Miller didn't protect the badge, I said sternly. He tarnished it. Every time he planted evidence, he made your job harder. He made the community trust you less. He put a target on your backs because he convinced the public that you are the enemy. I pointed to the empty witness stand. Loyalty is a virtue, I told them, but blind loyalty to a corrupt leader is a suicide pact. If you saw what he was doing and said nothing, you share his cell and spirit. If you stayed silent because you were afraid, well, the fear is gone now. Do not let another Miller rise in his place. It was a warning and a challenge. I wasn't just clearing the docket. I was trying to reset the culture of an entire county from the bench. Court is in recess for 15 minutes, I announced, slamming the gavel. I need to wash my hands. I walked into my chambers and closed the door. The noise of the courtroom was cut off instantly, replaced by the hum of the ventilation system. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Taking down a sheriff isn't like sentencing a shoplifter. It's like pulling a loose thread on a cheap sweater. You pull hard enough, and the whole thing unravels. My phone rang. The private line, the one only a few people have. I looked at the caller ID, State District Attorney's Office. They were fast. Miller hadn't even been fingerprinted yet, and the machine was already trying to protect its gears. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't pick up. I wasn't interested in horse trading. I wasn't interested in hearing about how Miller was close to retirement or how a public scandal would hurt the department's morale. I had just watched a mother cry because she thought her son was going to prison for a crime he didn't commit. That was the only morale I cared about. I walked back into the courtroom. The energy had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a buzzing anticipation. The reporters were typing furiously. The deputies who had arrested Miller were standing straighter, as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. But the prosecutor, he looked like a ghost. He was shuffling papers, trying to look busy, trying to look invisible. He knew that the spotlight was turning toward him next. "Mr. Prosecutor," I said as I took my seat. He jumped. "Yes, Your Honor, I want to address the scope of the audit I mentioned," I said. "We are not just looking at Sheriff Miller's arrests. We are looking at your office's prosecutions." He swallowed hard. "My office? Your Honor, we rely on the evidence provided by law enforcement. We couldn't have known." "You couldn't have known?" I interrupted. 74 cases where the camera malfunctioned. 74. And not once did a prosecutor in your office think to ask why. Not once did you question why the sheriff was the only witness in every major drug bust. I leaned forward. Willful blindness is not a defense counselor. It is an accomplice. I picked up a stack of files, the docket for the rest of the afternoon. Many of them were Miller's cases. "I am issuing a blanket order," I announced. "Any defendant currently in custody awaiting trial on charges based solely on the testimony of Sheriff Miller is to be released on their own recognizance immediately." Pending the review, a murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented. I was emptying the jail of Miller's victims. "Furthermore," I continued, "I want a list of every plea deal signed in the last 5 years involving the sheriff. We are going to reopen them all. If people pleaded guilty because they were afraid they couldn't beat a lying cop in court, they deserve a second chance." The prosecutor looked like he might faint. "Your Honor, the logistics, the cost, the backlog. Justice is not efficient," I said coldly. "It is necessary. You worried about the cost of fixing this? You should have worried about the cost of letting it happen." I looked at the gallery, at the faces of the people who lived in this town. For years, they had believed the system was rigged against them. Today, I had to prove that the system could fix itself. "This court is not a rubber stamp for the police department," I declared. "We do not work for the sheriff. We work for the Constitution. And starting today, we are going to act like it." I saw Marcus and his mother still sitting in the front row. They hadn't left. They were watching, witnessing the dismantling of the machine that had almost crushed them. Marcus looked at me. He gave a small nod. It wasn't a bow. It was an acknowledgement, from one man to another. I checked the clock. It had been less than an hour since Miller walked in here like a king. Now, his empire was crumbling. But there was one final piece of business. One loose end that Miller had left dangling. A threat he had whispered to his deputy on the way out. Deputy Roberts approached the bench. He looked pale, like he had seen a ghost. He leaned in close, speaking in a hush so the reporters couldn't hear. "Your Honor," he whispered. On the way to the cell, Miller said something. He said, "If he goes down, the safe in his garage goes public. He said he has files on everyone. Even you." I paused. This was the final card, the scorched earth strategy. A corrupt man always keeps insurance. He collects dirt on his enemies and his friends, just in case the walls start closing in. Miller thought this threat would make me hesitate. He thought I would pause the proceedings to protect my own reputation, or the reputation of the city. He was wrong. "Deputy," I said loud enough for the court reporter to transcribe. "Did Sheriff Miller just threaten this court with blackmail?" Robert stiffened. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good," I said. "Then we don't need to guess where the rest of the bodies are buried." I grabbed a pen and a fresh warrant form. I wrote furiously, "I am issuing an immediate search warrant for the residence of former Sheriff Miller," I announced. "Specifically, any safes, lockboxes, or digital storage devices." And deputy, I want the state police to execute it, not the local department. We need this clean. I handed the paper down. He thinks his secrets are leverage, but in a criminal investigation, secrets are just more evidence. Go get that safe. The deputy ran out the door. That was the end of Miller's reign, not with a bang, but with the stroke of a pen. In the weeks that followed, the safe was opened. It didn't contain leverage against me. It contained cash, stacks of it, and ledgers. Records of every bribe he had taken, every piece of evidence he had planted, every life he had ruined for profit. He wasn't just a bad cop. He was a criminal enterprise in a uniform. Miller was indicted on 30 federal charges: racketeering, civil rights violations, perjury. He is currently serving a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. He doesn't have a view of the street anymore. He has a view of a concrete wall. And Marcus, the boy whose life almost ended that night, he finished community college. He is working as an EMT now. He saves lives for a living. He told me once that he wanted to be the kind of first responder who helps people, not the kind who hurts them. He learned that from seeing the difference between a man who demands respect and a man who earns it. I think about this case often. I think about how close we came to letting evil win. If that dash cam hadn't been recording, if I had been too tired to look at the file, Miller would still be out there. It reminds me that justice is not a guarantee. It is a struggle. It is a constant battle against the darkness that tries to creep into the halls of power. There are people out there right now who think they are above the law. They think their money, their connections, or their badges make them untouchable. They think they can rewrite the rules, but they forget one thing. They forget that there are people like us, people who are watching, people who are not afraid to turn on the lights. My father was right. Character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Miller treated them like prey. We treated them like citizens. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: authority without integrity is just tyranny, and tyranny has no place in my courtroom. Thank you for watching. If you believe that truth should always win, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below if you think justice was served today. I am Judge Boyd, and this court is adjourned.